Hey, good morning, everybody. So, did everybody have a positive weekend? As far as you're going to tell me, yes. All right. Everybody get a chance to read. Is there any questions on the readings? Okay, not that you will tell me. All right. Everybody ready to go for the quiz then? This should be an easy one. All righty. I feel bad. I was going to give them back to you, but I did not because I still haven't written down all your suggestions for improving the class. I will try to have those back to you on Wednesday. Okay, you guys ready? All right. So What caused the Korean conflict? Spread of communism. All right. What specific thing happened?
The Soviets set up a communist government in the north.
Okay, Soviets set up a communist government in the north. The U.S. set up a capitalist government in the south, right? And did we attack them?
No.
No. What? The north invaded the south. All right, so the north invades the south. We fight for a few years. How does it end? This is a trick question.
A ceasefire was agreed on.
Okay. A ceasefire was agreed on. Has the Korean conflict ever ended? Officially, it is still going on. So there is a ceasefire, but officially the war is continuing. If you got the last part wrong, it's fine. That's not something I'm going to, worry about right now. All right. So, like I said, we're going to talk through the midterms, but I'm going to go ahead and push that to the end of the class for this class. And then we'll just make sure we get it through everything and we can hit the questions as we need. All right. So this is just a quick review. We had World War II. What happens in World War II? What are the absolute big events?
Hitler took over basically all of Europe.
Okay, Hitler takes over almost all of Europe.
The Manhattan Project.
Okay, we create the atomic bomb because we think Germany is creating the atomic bomb. Okay, the Japanese attack Pearl Harbor, which gets the U.S. into the conflict.
The Germans invaded Russia.
The Germans invade Poland and then they invade Russia, which makes it a lot harder for them. Who winds up winning?
The Allies.
Okay, the Allies. So the U.S., England, France, and Russia for the most part, and China has a part in this in Asia. All right, what's the Iron Curtain?
The line between communist governments in the east and capitalist governments in the west.
All right, so the communists set up a barrier between the east and the west, so we don't really know what's happening over there. They can change the governments, they can do whatever they want to, and we really don't know a whole lot. What is the Berlin Crisis and the Berlin Airlift? Okay, come on, this is air, so you know it's exciting.
That's when they flew all the supplies into the city of Berlin over the...
All right, so once they shut off East Germany, we can't afford to help East Berlin, and we wind up saying, okay, we're not going to just try to take tanks through. We fly planes in, and we wind up taking care of West Berlin better than the Soviets can take care of East Berlin, even though we are flying everything in and they are not. So what is the Marshall Plan? All right, somebody hasn't said something.
Plan to boost the economies of the European countries.
All right, we are going to boost the economies of the European countries that are really struggling after World War II so that we can ensure that they don't get taken over by communism, right? All right, and then the last question, what happens in the Truman's last election? Does he get booted out? Dewey wins. Everybody remember President Dewey? Okay, Truman wins, Dewey does not win. That's why you're like, what? President Dewey? There is no President Dewey. Truman wins the election, and so now we are full-fledged into the Cold War. The first thing that I want to talk about in the Cold War is China. Before World War II, there are communists in China who are trying to take over China. But they are not very strong, and so they start to go into the rural areas and try to get the rural peasants to become communists. They are stronger up in the north. Why do you think that might be? What is right near the north that would give them communist support?
Soviet Union's right there.
Yeah, Soviet Union is right here. So they are getting support from the communists in the Soviet Union. And so they are starting to push. But while they're fighting, something else happens. Japan goes ahead and invades China. Now, we will go ahead and say this is Oklahoma. So everyone in this state hates Texas, right? I mean, we had a ball game to prove it this last weekend. Correct? Or should I just not mention that? But, so, Texas and Oklahoma are having a big, big fight, right? You guys aren't even awake. That's kind of scary. All right, so Texas and Oklahoma are having this big fight. New York decides to roll in, or you know what, let's say California. California decides to roll in and fight Texas and Oklahoma. What's going to happen?
Oklahoma and Texas are going to team up to fight California.
Okay, Oklahoma and Texas will team up to fight California because they're like, hey, get out. So, who invades China? Japan. And realistically, and I probably should have said, so Republicans and Democrats, but then Canada comes in and invades, right? So, long story short, when an outsider comes into your country, are you going to fight your own countrymen or are you going to fight the outsider?
The outsiders.
Yeah. You're like, nope, this is our fight. We'll get back to this, but let's push the Japanese out. So the Chinese start fighting against Japan. The U.S. supports the nationalists in their fight. The Soviets support the communists in their fight. But everyone is fighting against the Japanese. Now, once the Japanese are defeated, what happens in China? Is the war over? Is their conflict over? No. So the Chinese actually say, all right, we're going to try to have this combined government. We're going to see if we can work together. What is the goal of communism? To overthrow capitalist governments. So is there really a way that communists and capitalists can work together? No. So even though they try for just a little bit, it doesn't work. Now, the other thing is at the end of the war, Russia rolls in and takes a big portion of this area of China and into North Korea. So when the communists are rolling in, what do they do with their troops when the conflict is over?
They stay there.
They stay there. This time, they only stay there for a little bit, and the reason this is different is this area becomes quickly controlled by the communists, by the Chinese communists. So is there any reason for the Soviets to stay in the country? They can just hand over to the people who believe like them and say, here, you take our weapons, you take our supplies, you take everything we have, and you go fight the good fight, right? And so now the Chinese communists are fighting against the nationalists. But they have a lot of better weapons. They have all sorts of good positive stuff that help them in this fight. The weird part is the communists in the Soviet Union say the way to become communist is you take over the cities, and once you have the cities, then you expand into the rural areas. In China, they actually take over the rural areas first, and the nationalists control the cities. This is kind of weird. Why do you think this might happen in China?
Because there are a lot of rural areas in China.
Okay, the rural areas are really poor, and where the Soviets have come in, they hand people food and clothes and weapons. So the peasants are doing much better than they were under the previous government, and so they kind of say, okay, this is fine. And then once they kind of have control over the area, they confiscate all the land from the big landowners, and they say, we're going to go ahead and divide the land up and give it to all the peasants. If you're a peasant and you've never had land before, are you going to support the communists? Yeah. I mean, realistically, you're like, yes, now somebody has given me land. This is what I want. All right. So the nationalists control the cities and the south, and the communists control the north and the peasants. Over time, the State Department sends in a general, and they say, hey, we want you to tell us what's happening here. And the general actually writes this long message, and it's like, look, if we don't take action, if we don't support the nationalists, we are going to lose China to the communists. They are doing really well. They're giving them weapons. They're giving them food. We have to support the nationalists in the South. He sends the message back into the State Department, and for 2 years, this message is stuck in someone's drawer. Now, I will admit, I don't know, was it stuck in the drawer because somebody is just that incompetent, or we do know that there were many communists who were in the State Department. Was it someone who was a communist and said, we want the communists to win, and so they just stuck it in their drawer and it got lost? I have no idea, but they hold it for 2 years. In the meantime, during that 2 years, the communists start taking over China, and by October of 1949, the communists have taken over China. So what do the nationalists do?
They moved to Taiwan.
They moved to Taiwan. All right, so on this map, can you guys all see the map? This is China, right? This is Taiwan. Little bitty island. What I think is funny about this is both the communists and the nationalists, the capitalists, say there is one China. That one China includes both China and the island of Taiwan. The amusing thing to me is the communists say, we control both parts. And I'm like, doesn't seem to be the case, right? But the more outrageous claim is the capitalists down here in Taiwan who say there's one China and we control it. I'm like, I don't know, you haven't looked at the map recently, right? Because you control this, they control this. I'm thinking maybe you don't control all of China, right? But for years, there was this mantra that one China, and both sides argue over who controls it. So, who supports the communists? All right, you guys are worrying me. Soviet Union. All right, and who supports the nationalists?
United States.
The United States. And so we basically continue to have this fight for decades. Truman is blamed for losing China, and so this causes a lot of concerns for him. The other thing that happens that puts Truman in a lot of difficulty is the atomic bomb. So when the U.S. creates the atomic bomb, the Soviets start spying on the U.S. They have had spies in the U.S. since prior to World War I, but the U.S. is like, okay, whatever. Now that we are building the atomic bomb, and even the vice president doesn't know about it. Stalin knew more. In fact, Stalin knew much, much more about the atomic bomb than Truman did when Truman became president. How would he know this?
Because of the spies.
Okay, you've got spies. It's kind of interesting when you look at it. There are actual spies in the program. there are spies who are pulling people that don't mean to be spying for the communists, but they will tell their friend information. And then you have scientists who are actually working in creating the bomb, but they're really scared that if one country controls the atomic bomb, that one country will be able to do anything they want, and they don't think that's appropriate. So if you think one country is going to control the bomb, and that's the US, and you want to have someone outside of the US who can stop this from happening, who would you give the information to? Who is the one country after World War II that you think would be able to fight with the US? The Soviet Union. And a lot of people are really naive at this time. Does anybody know has anybody read Alexander Solzhenitsyn's books? All right. Do you know what's happening in the early Soviet Union?
Gulags.
All right. So basically, anyone who doesn't grasp and really want to join with communism is called an enemy of the state. And any enemy of the state is either executed or put into state prisons, which they call gulags, and it's work camps. So I don't want to overdo this, but it's very similar to the work camps that the Nazis had established. I mean, lots of people have done this over time, where it's like, okay, you don't agree with us, so we're going to put you in a camp. You're going to work for minimal food, and you're going to work 12-hour days under horrible conditions, and you don't get out unless you basically agree with what we say. So they don't know that all this stuff is going on because behind the Iron Curtain we can't see, right? So you just have all these people that are trying to figure out, how do we make sure that the US isn't the only people with the bomb? And they start providing information to the Soviets. So when the bomb explodes, Stalin actually finds out within minutes that it's a success. Again, his methods are really, really good, and he knows almost immediately. As soon as he knows that it explodes, he's like, okay, we have to build our own bomb. When the US bombs Hiroshima and Nagasaki, when they bomb Hiroshima, Stalin says the balance of the world has changed, and he tells his scientists, you will create an atomic bomb just like the US's. The Soviets decide, what they do is they grab all the intel, all of the information that they have on the US bomb, and they give it to one guy. And they say, you're going to run the program to develop the Soviet atomic bomb. And so he gets all the scientists together, and every time he's like, okay, what do you think we should do next? If the scientists he's working with are like, hey, we think we're going to move this direction and it's different than what the US says, he's like, no, no, no. What we really should do is try it this way. And shockingly, is he always right? Actually, he is, because he has the US plans. He knows how the US built their bomb, so he knows how to make sure it will work. So by 1949, the Soviets build their own bomb. Shockingly, it looks just like the US bomb, right? So when we discover the spies, should we arrest them and send them to prison or execute them? You would think so, right? So we don't. And a lot of historians over the years have said the reason that we didn't execute spies is because there were no spies. But I will go ahead and I will hit you up with a different perspective. Makeda, you're a spy.
Okay.
I know, you didn't know that, but you're selling the atomic weapon stuff.
Okay.
Now, if I arrest you and I take you to court,
Yeah.
when we go to court, are you allowed to bring in all of the information on the nuclear bomb?
Probably not.
Actually, that's the weird part, because you're going to say, prove to me that I stole information and that it would lead to an atomic bomb and that I sold it. So the only way to do that is for me to show the data, the actual stuff that you stole, and prove that you could build an atomic bomb with it. Now, once it is in court, can you classify anything that goes to court in a regular court? No, it's open to the public. So the only way that I could get Makeda to go to jail is to risk her saying, show me everything you have on the atomic bomb. Do I want to do that?
No.
No, because at that point, any Tom, Dick, and Harry can come in and build an atomic bomb. I will have gone from the US and the Soviet Union having access to the atomic bomb to Sam from Walmart is, sitting in Walmart buying materials. Hey, could I get a little plutonium? Hey, I'd like this, right? So if I know that you're a spy, what do I do? How do I stop this? No one has thoughts, huh? Okay, yes. In any other place, you just kill them off and you're good. But this is the US, and we can't do that. So you basically have to walk up and you go, you know what? I'm cutting you off from everything. And if you do anything else bad, we're going to be watching you and we're going to arrest you and we're going to make your life miserable. Or you walk away from this and you never say anything else to anybody, and everybody it goes away. And that's what we wound up doing with a lot of the spies, is just saying, hey, look, we can't try you, because if we try you, you're going to release all the information about the atomic bomb to the world. So you just walk away. We'll never give you access to anything again, but you can have a decent life. If you ever release anything else, we will tell everybody that you released information about the atomic bomb, and you will never work as a scientist again. And so a lot of the guys were like, okay, that's fine. And they walked away. Now, we do have proof. There are Venona documents, which is NSA's coded materials that they found from the Soviet Union. And they show conversations between Soviet spies and US spies. And they started decoding them. And they finally, it took a long, long time for them to get them decoded. They finally were able to figure out who many of the spies are. Now, realistically, they're just leaving them uncoded, or coded, because everyone involved is dead. So it doesn't really matter if someone was a spy now, just let it be. But we did find a lot of the spies. Now, the one unique difference is Ethel and Julius Rosenberg. Ethel and Julius Rosenberg are the only people in the US that have been executed for treason, specifically spying and giving information on the atomic bomb. Now, based on what I told you before, why would we execute Ethel and Julius Rosenberg?
Because they refused to walk away?
Okay, so the really weird part is because they were stupid, which is kind of the same thing. But with the scientists, they understood how to make an atomic bomb, right? With Ethel and Julius Rosenberg, Ethel's brother worked in the program. And we grabbed him and we said, tell us everyone you know, tell us who you gave this to. And he's like, I really don't want to. And we were like, well, do you want to die? Do you want your wife to be imprisoned and your kids to be orphans? And he's like, nope, it was my sister and my brother-in-law. They took it and they are selling, they are giving it to the Soviets. And so once he gave us all the information, we're like, okay, you're never going to be associated with this stuff again. If I remember right, we put him in jail for just a little bit, and then he was released, and everything moves on. Ethel and Julius Rosenberg actually had no idea how to build the atomic bomb. They just took the information from Ethel's brother and they retyped it, and then they handed it on to the Soviet spies. So if you don't understand it, then all I have to do is prove, here's documents that say this came from the atomic bomb weapon, here's the typewriter that they retyped it on, here is the sheets that they retyped it, and at that point you say, these people helped build the atomic bomb. Since I said they don't understand how to build the bomb, can they in open court say, yes, this is what we were going to do with it? No. So, not that I want you guys to be spies, but if you ever get caught for spying, make sure you understand the, how to. Don't be stupid, because if you're stupid, and the other piece is, when we said, tell us who the Soviet spies are, they said, nope, we will not tell you. And so we said, all right, we're going to take you in, we're going to try you. They were convicted of treason. Even after they were convicted of treason, we're like, okay, if you will just tell us who the Soviet spies are, we will let you go. And they said no. And we said, all right. And so they both died.
Do you think at that point they just probably knew their fate either way?
I really think that had they told us who the Soviet spies were, we would have released them. Or, they'd have gone to prison for a while, but they would have gotten out.
Then the Soviets would have found a way to kill them?
Now, that's a whole different matter. And yes, there is a good possibility if they released the Soviet names, the Soviets would have come after them. So, yeah. But by this time, it's a bad situation. They are not going to win. All right. So 1949, China becomes communist. We lose the bomb, and the Soviets have the atomic bomb. Now we're going to talk about Korea. As I always do, let's go back in time. In 1910, remember when I talked about Teddy Roosevelt and helping with the Soviets, or the Russians at that time, versus the Japanese, and he helps solve the problems there. Japan occupies Korea. So Japan changes the Koreans' name to make them more Japanese. They change their addresses so that they have to use the Japanese style post offices. They force the little Korean kids to learn Japanese in school, and they are not allowed to learn Korean. So very much the cultural destruction like we have seen in other places, right? During World War II, they forced the Koreans to help the Japanese. So I did some work on the POWs that we captured in World War II. And one of the big problems we have when we captured POWs in the Pacific, you would grab a bunch of people, you would put them in a camp, and overnight, half of the prisoners would kill the other half of the prisoners. And we were like, what is going on? And finally, someone came in who spoke Korean. And the Korean prisoners came in and they said, yes, we're on your side, we hate the Japanese, so at night, when they're sleeping, we kill them all. And so sometimes the Koreans would kill the Japanese, sometimes the Japanese would fight back and kill all the Koreans, but they would kill each other at night because we didn't understand that the Koreans were basically being made to be slaves to the Japanese, and they didn't want to be. So as soon as the situation allowed them to, they would fight the Japanese themselves. So after the war, the Soviets roll into Korea. Now, realistically, should we treat Korea as a bad nation?
Now?
No, at the end of World War II.
Oh, sorry.
Were they an Axis power. That's the weird part. We perceive that they are helping Japan, and so they are an Axis power. But they were actually forced into doing it. So as soon as the war is over, we should have just let them go and said, hey, you're now freed from the Japanese, everything's good. But the Soviets have rolled into Korea. So what do they do everywhere that they roll into?
Set up a communist government.
They set up a communist government. They leave their troops there and set up a communist government. So we divide Korea into two areas. When we divide it, it's actually done by two guys or a few guys over in Europe. They look at a map of Korea and they're like, I wonder, hey, you know what? There's a line about halfway through the Korean peninsula with half on top and half below. And it's the longitudinal line, right? So they just say, let's use the longitudinal line to divide Korea. In the entire thousands of years of history in Korea, has Korea ever been divided at that line? No. This line means nothing to the Korean people. There are family members, within miles of each other. Now one is a communist and one is a capitalist, right? And so this causes the Koreans a lot of frustration because they're like, we don't want to be two countries. We want to be one country. We have always been Korea. So both sides of Korea want to resume having one country. And they both know that the best way to do that is to defeat the other side. So the North is prepared to attack the South is prepared to attack the North. The Soviets give the North Koreans a lot of weapons, a lot of training, and they are ready to invade the South. The US is really scared that the South is going to invade the North, and we don't want them to. So we give them some equipment, but it's old and obsolete. And we're like, you can't go attack them. We're not going to support you in this. So over time, Kim Il-sung, who is selected as by the Soviets as the leader of the North, goes up to Stalin. He's like, can it go down and kick the South's butt? Now, if you're Stalin, as long as you think that the U.S. is going to protect the South, do you want to have a war in Korea? No, because you don't want to get involved in another war. You just got out of World War II, and you're like, oh, okay, let's just slow down, let's relax. But Kim Il-sung is like, no, I'm ready, let's go. And so he keeps pressing and pressing. Finally, we start having problems because the U.S. says, hey, we're going to protect all the islands in the Pacific from Soviet and communist domination. Now, there's a problem. Is Korea an island? No. We were thinking about Taiwan, we were thinking about Japan, but we kind of blew it and we forgot to say, and Korea. And so Kim Il-sung goes to the Soviets and they say, hey, we want to go down. By this time, there are communists in the South and they start having strikes and they start sabotaging things. And he's like, the South is ready. Let's go in and let's invade. And so Stalin looks at him and says, you know what? Get Chinese support. If the Chinese will support you in this, then I will support you in this. Now, it's kind of interesting. Why would Stalin say that?
Then it won't be his problem.
Yeah. If the U.S. winds up fighting, it's China's fight, not the Soviet Union's. And so he's like, get China to help you. Now, can China say no? And the answer to that is no. And Stalin knows it. Stalin helped China. North Korea helped China in taking over China for the communists. And so the Chinese owe North Korea. They owe the Soviet Union. Taiwan is still right there, and they want support to take over Taiwan in the near future. So they know the only answer they can give is yes. Go in, attack South Korea, and we will help you. So June 25th, 1950, the North Koreans attack with 135,000 soldiers. The South has like 50,000 at the border. It's really not a large number. The North claims that the South invaded them and they responded. And I'm like, okay, anyone who's not an idiot is going to look at this situation and say, there's not that many Southerners there, and they don't have good equipment. There's no way that the South would be stupid enough to attack the North. So the North goes ahead, they attack into the South. The U.S. sends about 16,000 troops from Japan, but they really don't have a lot of people in the Pacific anymore because everybody is rolled back to the U.S. So the North Koreans just roll straight through Korea. In fact, the South Korean army is so bad at the time, and I don't want to say bad as in they don't care, but they don't have the equipment they need, they don't have everything that will help them to fight. So right above Seoul, the capital of South Korea, there is a bridge. And the armies in the South are told, if the North Koreans get to the bridge, let the South Koreans over the bridge and then blow up the bridge. Instead, as the South Korean army is getting to the bridge to run over it, the people on the bridge are so scared that they don't recognize that it's their own troops retreating, and they blow the bridge before the South Korean army gets there. Now the South Korean army is basically crushed against the river, and they are destroyed. So the North Korean army rolls down and they take all of South Korea except for this little bitty corner here. The U.S. is asked, can you please help? And we say, yes, we will come in. We have in Japan, you have MacArthur, who was the guy who got credit for winning in World War II. He rolls in. Japan is here. South Korea is here. So he brings troops around. He does not help in this area. He actually brings the troops around and they invade over here in Incheon, which is in the center of the peninsula. Any thoughts on why he might do that? If he comes in here, what are they going to have to do?
Go all the way back up.
Okay, all of the North Korean troops are here, so you're going to have to break through all of the fighting troops and try to drive them north. By coming over here, he rolls in. Not all of their fighting troops are down in this area. This is more your logistics troops. As soon as they land, they can punch through the logistics troops, and then they stop all the food and all the ammunition and all the clothing going in to support these guys. So it's a really brilliant move on his part. He does come across, and as soon as they lose their food and ammunition and clothes and they can't fight anymore, the North Koreans run back to the north, right? At that point, everyone starts to see all of the atrocities that have been committed by the North in the South, where they tortured people, where they were, harming women and children. And so now everybody's really frustrated. MacArthur calls back to Truman. He's like, look, I want to go ahead. I want to take over all of Korea. This is what the South Koreans want. This is what everybody wants. We can do it. Truman says, you know what? That's fine, but don't go to where you're going to threaten the Chinese. If you threaten the Chinese, then we're going to have a war, and we don't want to do that. The other thing that I forgot to mention is when the U.S. decides to enter the war, do they declare war? No. Truman doesn't go to Congress because he's afraid Congress will not support him. So he goes to the UN, and it is a UN declared conflict. Now, the weird part is the Soviet Union has the ability to veto anything that happens from the UN, right? So when the US goes in and they say, hey, the North Koreans invaded the South and we have to go in and help the South protect themselves, which sticks with the Truman Doctrine, sticks with the Marshall Plan, all this stuff. The UN says, hey, this is a good idea. Why doesn't the Soviet Union veto this? For a long time, everybody thought it was because they were stupid. They chose this time to be angry and say, we're not going to play with the UN for a while. And we were like, haha, Stalin's really stupid because he picked the wrong time to boycott, and now we got to fight in Korea. What really happened, and what people are seeing now that we've seen some of the Soviet documents, is, again, who's going to have to fight this war if the US fights? Is the Soviet Union? No. China. So does it bother Stalin if China has to fight the Soviet Union, or fight the US? No, he's like, okay, no skin off my nose. Plus, if he can get the US to fight China, then the US will not be able to protect Europe and NATO. So this is his plan. He says, we're going to get the US and China to fight each other. Meanwhile, we'll go into Europe and take over all of Western Europe. And so this is why he's like, oh yeah, we will boycott the UN. We're not going to get involved so that the US can fight China and then I can take over Europe. It actually doesn't happen because the US realizes the threat to Europe is still real, so they maintain troops in Europe while they are fighting in South Korea. All right. So once we are fighting, we push all the way back up to the north, and MacArthur is ready to roll into China. He says at one point, Truman says, look, if you cause problems, then the Chinese are going to come down. And he says, that's okay. Nothing a few atomic bombs can't handle, right? Truman is the only president who has ever had an atomic bomb go off in war. He does not want to do this again. He knows that the world will not support an atomic war. And he's like, no, we're not doing that. So when the Chinese enter the war, Truman requests peace talks. He's like, look, let's just slow down. Let's get this figured out. I don't want to fight China. Truman comes back from the war zone and talks to Congress and says, Truman's a wimp. He can't fight. If he would just let me do my job, I would defeat China in, just weeks. And at this point, Truman fires him. Why do you think Truman needs to fire him? What did MacArthur potentially tell FDR about running for the presidency? Do you remember?
If he didn't get his way, he would do it.
If he didn't get his way, he was going to run for the presidency against FDR. He is going directly to Congress, and he is a very big political threat to Truman. Now, Truman won't be running again, most likely, but he's like, you know what? I can't have a general who has political aspirations, who is making decisions on the battlefield based on these political aspirations. And secondly, I can't have a general who doesn't understand that they have to live under civilian authority. And so he fires him. He replaces him with a guy named Ridgway. Ridgway starts what you call the meat grinder. Now, if you're in a war and you hear it's called the meat grinder, is that a war you want to be involved with? No. What do you think the meat grinder is? Basically, both sides just get killed and killed and killed, and we just keep throwing guys into both sides, and thousands of people are just massacred on both sides. So finally, the Soviets request a ceasefire on June 1951. This is interesting because the timing is right after Stalin dies. So Stalin does not want the war to end. He wants the US and China to continue fighting. China doesn't want this war anymore, but when Stalin dies, the Soviet Union's like, okay, you know what? We don't want to support this war anymore, so let's go ahead and we will have peace talks. The peace talks last for 2 years. Everybody sits down and they're like, okay, what do we want? And the North Koreans are kind of funny. They actually set it up so the North Koreans have taller chairs at the table. They make it look in every way like the North Koreans have won. And so the US, fights back and says, no, 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 this is not what's going to happen. For the last 2 years, there's no real change in the battlefield. Nobody's winning. So finally, after 2 years, we come back and we draw a line. This time the line is more reflective of the geography of where the troops are. And we say, okay, we are going to stop the war. Now we have created a, wow, just lost the name of it. There's a line in the center of the Koreas, and the North is not allowed to go there. The South is not allowed to go there. They actually have gone in. They chopped down all the trees. And if you go into Korea, obviously, well, I would presume, obviously, that you would be on the south side. You are not allowed to cross into this zone. And we leave a lot of U.S. military personnel in South Korea because we want to make sure that the North Koreans don't try to invade again. It is probably one of the most dangerous places on earth because if you set foot in this zone, you will get shot. So the war is actually not officially over since, 1953, I think. So how long? 70 years? This war has been continuing, even though officially nobody is fighting it. All right, so let's finish up with the Red Scare. So we do know that spies stole the atomic bomb from the US, right? Historically, we recognize that. We do know that people in State Department didn't do their job well to help protect China. So we know that there are spies. We know that Korea and Berlin are big fights with the communists. And there's a real threat that we will move into World War III. Now, at this time, if you ask people, hey, is there going to be a World War III? The answer was yes. There will be World War III between the Soviet Union and the US. It's going to happen near term, right? And the winner of the war is going to be the one who has more nukes and defeats the other side with nukes. Now, what are your thoughts of a nuclear war?
No, thank you.
Okay, no one wants to fight a nuclear war. Why?
Destroy the
Because, yeah, you destroy the world. So now, after the Cuban Missile Crisis, everybody's like, we don't want a World War III. At this time, the general in charge of the Strategic Air Command, which was our warfighting command to drop nuclear bombs, someone asked him, how do you know if you won a nuclear war? Do you know what his answer is? If I have one woman and one man who can continue to procreate, we won. Is that the kind of war you want to win? No, I mean, but this is the mindset. So, have you guys ever heard of, the duck and cover? They taught students in class, look, if you're getting ready to go to a nuclear war, what you need to do is hide under your desk, and then when the nuclear bomb goes off, you will be protected. Now, realistically, if a bomb is dropped closely to you, is hiding under your desk going to do any good? No. But at the same time, after the bomb's over, if you died, then you're not going to complain, right? So it's a way that they kind of got people to say, hey, we can protect ourselves. There is an understanding that if the bomb blast is far enough away, then potentially being under something could give you a small bit of protection. But yeah, realistically, it's not that great. We did come up with the Smith Act that said that if you try to advocate overthrowing the U.S. government, that you can go to prison. Does that violate the First Amendment? Yes, absolutely. But it goes to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court says it's okay. This law we will uphold. And this is when you hear the whole discussion of if you go into a theater and you yell fire, it's illegal because you're creating problems, that will cost people lives. And they say we're not going to allow people to put us in a position where the government can be overthrown. It's a clear and present danger. They have the blacklist in Hollywood. They have blacklist in the State Department and a lot of the federal government, where they say you have to write a piece of paper that says you're not a communist, or you'll be fired. And intriguingly, a lot of people, there's a huge number of State Department employees who refuse to sign. Now, part of me says, okay, you could just be saying, hey, I don't want to sign something, but I don't understand, why would you just not sign it? And so a lot of people struggle with that. They established the loyalty program, and then Joseph McCarthy rolls in. Now, Senator Joseph McCarthy, he comes in, he actually has a speech in West Virginia, and in the speech, he's talking about the evils of communism. Communism is horrible, and he holds up a sheet of paper and he says, in my hand, I have a list of communists working for the federal government. Now, if I walk into this room, all right, who is our biggest rival college-wise?
NSU, probably.
Okay. If I walk into this room and I say, I have a list of people who like NSU better than they like RSU, what should you ask me first? If I really think these people are bad, horrible people, what is the first thing you should want to know?
Is my name on that list?
Who is on the list? Show us the list. Joseph McCarthy does not show the list. Now, if there were truly communists in the government, wouldn't it make sense that instead of standing in front of a civilian audience who can't really do anything, saying, I have a list of communists in the government, he would say, hey, President Truman, here's the communists in your government, you need to get rid of them, right? Why does he not do that?
Because he's a liar.
Because it's a political ploy. He wants to gain political points by talking about the communist threat in the government. Now, there is a communist threat, but it's not the communist threat that he is talking about. He doesn't have any information that anybody else doesn't have. And so, but everybody in the room is like, oh, wow, this guy is amazing. So the next speech he gives, what do you think he says? I know that there are people in the government who are communists, and look, I have this list. And everybody's like, woo, that's amazing. Now, some people say, show us the list. And as soon as you say, show us the list, he's like, oh, you're on the list. And you're like, I'm not a communist, that's crazy. And he's like, nope, you are on the list. And so he destroys a lot of people's careers, because if you go against him, then he automatically calls you out as a communist. And at this point, everybody is so scared of communists that they're like, oh, okay, well, I don't want anything to do with that. So you kind of just separate yourself from that person. It's sort of like now where, people are like, hey, that person is whatever. And everybody's like, okay, I can't support that person, right? So he starts calling people out. How does this finally end? Anybody know? He winds up actually saying that the U.S. Army is filled with communists. Now, think about this. This is the late 1950s. The U.S. Army, over the last 15 years, has been fighting in World War II and in Korea. What are the chances that there's a load of communist generals running around in the Army? It's insane. And so people are finally getting the courage to say, McCarthy, you're just crazy. You're not making sense. And when he goes before Congress and the lawyer for the Army is sitting there, and he says, there's all these communists. The lawyer says, look, Senator McCarthy, you're lying. Just tell the truth. And at that point, McCarthy goes, and the lawyer sitting with you, the young man sitting with you, he's a communist too. And the Army lawyer goes, at long last, Senator McCarthy, have you no decency? Have you no decency? And everyone in the meeting starts clapping. And everyone realizes that McCarthy is full of garbage. He doesn't really have any information. And so it's interesting, they try to kick him out of Congress. He is not kicked out of Congress, but he is an alcoholic. And as soon as he realizes that his bluff is called, he just goes ahead and he drinks himself to death. He winds up dying of alcohol poisoning and goes away. But that is kind of the end of the major crisis in the Cold War at that point. And so we will do a quick review, and then we will dive into the midterm questions. All right, so what causes the Korean conflict?
Communism.
Okay, what specific act? What? North Korea invades South Korea. How does it end? It did not. All right. Why did Truman fire General MacArthur?
Because he began undermining him and openly criticizing him.
Okay. He began undermining civilian control of the military, and he wanted to basically start an atomic war with China. And Truman's like, nope, that's not going to happen. And then how does the response to communist spies lead to McCarthy's witch hunt? Because everyone is so scared, we realize that there are spies. So when McCarthy throws out, hey, I have a list of spies, everybody's like, oh my goodness. Okay, this guy really knows something. And it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and you start blacklisting people, you start destroying people's lives, until finally people say, wait a minute, this is not realistic. All right, so for next class period, we will do the following reading and questions. But as soon as you guys are done with that, I want to walk through the midterm. All right, you guys ready to start? All right. So, how successful is Reconstruction? The first thing I was looking for, what is Reconstruction?
Rebuilding the South after.
Rebuilding the South after the Civil War. What is the goal of Reconstruction? When we say rebuild the South, are we just rebuilding buildings?
Bring the South back into the Union.
Okay, bringing the South back into the Union. And is there any other goals that we have?
For them to pretty much adopt what the North.
Okay, the whole conflict is about whether we're going to have slavery and whether we're going to, follow what the North wants to do or what the South wants to do. And so Reconstruction is you guys are basically not buying into the post-slavery world, so we're going to force you to do that. And so knowing that the goal of Reconstruction is to force the South into treating African Americans decently, how successful is Reconstruction?
None, because they did nothing more than overthrow them with their own political parties that they've created. And like
Okay.
the KKK and all that stuff.
Okay, so there's two answers that are both acceptable. I'm going to start with the opposite one, and then I'm going to hit yours. Did we get the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th Amendments pushed through?
Yes.
Yes. So now African Americans have civil rights. African Americans, if you are born in the U.S., you are now a citizen. You have to be treated as such, and slavery is gone, right? So in that way, Reconstruction is positive. But, I just said, Allison, the negative side of this is the KKK comes in, and as the U.S. military leaves, does the U.S. treat African Americans decently? No. And so it takes almost another 100 years for civil rights to be approved, right? All right, how does it end?
The final troops are pulled out.
Okay, in 1877, when the final U.S. troops are pulled out, it just kind of falls apart. All right, what does the Homestead Act do?
Gave 160-acre homesteads to settlers in the West.
Okay, 160 acres of homesteads to settlers who are going to take federal land, right? There's some federal land in the South, but a lot of it is in Kansas and in the West, right? So what other standards are there for this?
You gotta live there for 5 years and farm the land.
There you go. You have to improve the land and you have to live there for 5 years.
And
So,
work on citizenship.
all right. And if you're not a citizen, you need to become a citizen, right? All right. How does it change the United States?
It fills up the interior.
Okay, you start moving people into the interior. You're building towns into the Great American Desert as they knew it. The railroad starts to come out, so it starts to the U.S. expands into the area that had been left open. All right, and some people talked about how negatively that impacts the Native American nations in the area, and that is true as well. All right, who are the progressives?
Middle class men and women who were fighting for the common man.
Okay, they are middle class men and women who they have, for the most part, come from the poor, and so their lives are better, and they're like, we want to make other people's lives better. What are some of their goals?
The government should be more globally powerful.
Okay, so the government should be responsive to the people, right? The government should be more transparent, where we know what they're doing and why. And the government should help with workplace conditions. Does that make sense? All right. How does Hawaii become a territory?
By force.
Yes, by force. U.S. plantation owners take over the Queen, overthrow the Queen with help from U.S. Marines. Once they own the country, once they control the country, they ask the U.S. to take over. Cleveland says no until we're in the Spanish-American War, and then McKinley says, hey, you know what? We really need a place to coal the ships, so at that point, it becomes part of the U.S. All right, how does Wilson's 14 points lead to the League of Nations?
14th point itself.
Yes, I was looking for that specific statement. The 14th point says there should be a League of Nations. How successful is the League?
Not successful
It's not successful. Why?
because of Wilson's own faults.
Okay, Wilson's own faults, but I wanted a little more detail, and that is he didn't involve the Republicans in it, and so the U.S. doesn't join. And soon after, are we involved in another war? Yes, World War II. All right. What's the 19th Amendment?
Women's suffrage.
Women's suffrage, which, by the way, women's suffrage is the right to vote. So some people said ending women's suffrage, that would be ending the women's right to vote. But it is actually women's suffrage. At this point, suffrage is a positive word, right? It's the ability to vote. So how does it come about? Okay, women are supporting the war. Women are taking jobs that men have been holding, and they're like, hey, we are helping support the war. We expect your support in giving us the right to vote. What is the court packing plan?
Roosevelt's way of trying to get his own people into the Supreme Court, so that way he can pass through anything without it being considered unconstitutional.
All right, the Supreme Court is declaring many parts of the New Deal to be unconstitutional. Roosevelt's unhappy. He says, you know what? You guys are so old. You're 70 and older. You're not able to do your job, which is funny because they were actually doing their job. It's why he was ticked off. So he says, everybody that's more than 70 and a half, I am going to let you retire. They don't want to. So he says, well, in that case, I will put an additional judge who has a voting right on the court, and then I'll get my way. It is not approved by the American people and doesn't happen. What's the Kellogg-Briand Pact?
Pact to outlaw war.
Outlaw war. And it works super well, right? We have never had a war since the 62 nations approved. All right. It's complete failure, not worth the paper it's written on. How do we know that? World War II. All right. What's the Manhattan Project? Building the atomic bomb. All right. Why was it begun? Because we thought the Germans were building one. We didn't want them to have one, and we'd not have one. All right. Operation Overlord. What is Operation Overlord? Okay, the Battle of Normandy, which is
D-Day.
D-Day.
Or we were trying to remove Axis, whatever, I can't remember it now.
Okay, where England and the U.S. send troops and we attack into France and drive the British off of the coast of France so that we can have a beachhead and start moving in. All right. How successful is it? Yeah, we are not speaking German today, so obviously it was very successful. All right, I will say everyone got full credit on the extra credit question. Look at your grades. If you have concerns, come and talk to me. I'm going to put midterm grades in, but if I remember correctly, there is nobody in this class that's concerning me greatly. All right. I will talk to you guys later.
I do have a question.
Yeah.
So for our paper that's due on Wednesday, and we use we use our family member that we're talking about. As
Hang on just a minute. Hey, if you guys did not turn your paper into the Writing Center, it is late. But remember, that's 5% of your total grade. If you don't get it turned in, you lose a half a grade point.